Good.
The recording has started.
Good. So, well, welcome everyone. Bienvenidas y bienvenidos. Bonjour à tous. Thank you everyone for joining this webinar on survivor engagement, different approaches to different contexts. Another facilitated webinar, which is the result of a member-driven demand or need to further explore this topic. I'm just going to give you a bit of a practical aspects in terms of the format. So the format, each participant will have 7 minutes approximately to present, which will be followed by a 10 minutes Q&A. And then we will have an open discussion at the end of the session. Regarding the participation, you can participate both by writing in the chat or just by raising your hand or coming on mic during the Q&A or open discussion spaces. At the end of the session, there's going to be a post survey. It will be passed at the end of the session, and I will remind you then again. And then a recording consent must have also popped up as you join the meeting. So you know that this session will be recorded and it will also be available and shared in Fabo with the rest of the members. We would also like to thank the interpreters who are joining us today. So yeah, please speak slowly so we facilitate their job. And Lisa Henry, the Secretary General of the IRCT, will be moderating the session. And I'll pass the floor now on to you, Lisa.
Excellent. And thank you very much. And it's a great pleasure to see you all here today. As Berta said, I am the Secretary General of the IRCT. We are 161 torture rehabilitation centers strong around the globe, supporting torture survivors to rebuild their lives through health-based care and pursuit of justice. Prevention of torture is one of the key themes of this organization. And I'm so pleased that we have, I think it's over 80 people on the call, and I think 120 who are signed up. So I believe there'll be others joining us as we dive into this discussion. Our goal for today is to learn from each other. So please, step up with your questions. As Berta said, raise your hand, put your question in the chat. That's the point, right? This is a lesson learning session. You're going to have survivors of torture who are CEOs, who are directors, who are parliamentarians speaking to you, medical directors. It's your chance, right? And members have asked for this. So therefore, we're facilitating it. It's also for IRCT part of our information gathering on developing our new strategy for the years to moving forward. So what we say here today, we're going to be picking up information and informing our strategy as we move forward. So I'm sure you all know the survivor topic as such is a heated one. Lived experience is super powerful. It can be emancipating. It can also be paralyzing. Lived experience brings emotions into play. It also brings professional health considerations and safety considerations into play. So, what role do survivors of torture, survivors of rape, survivors of conversion therapy actually play in society? And what role do they play with respect to the torture and the anti-torture community? How important is it to engage with torture survivors in the rehabilitation process? Who gets to decide whether a survivor should speak up or not? And when? And why? And why is it that some health professionals and others are wary of this? What role is it that the family plays with respect to torture survivor engagement? The community. And what role should torture survivors play, if any, in the role of policymaking or informing policy? So these are all quandaries that we've been struggling with, and we're going to be hearing some really great inputs on this, but we have experience today from around the globe, luckily, and thank you very much. There's a combination of academic researchers here, there's lived experience here, there's practical knowledge. It will all come into play today. What we're choosing to do today, though, is use this experience, right? Human beings, as we know them, have abundant resources. And they've got this deeply embedded sense of resilience, capacity to survive, and most of all, a thirst or a hunger for a life with dignity. So therefore, to answer some of the questions that you might have, we have this really talented panel. The speakers today come from IRCT member centers, and I will briefly introduce them. So we've got Léonce Byimana. He is a survivor from Rwanda. He's now the executive director of the Torture, Abolition, and Survivors Support Coalition, TASSC, based out of Washington, DC. They're using a support-centered model of healing. And Léonce will be talking about torture survivors as advocates. We have Feride Rushiti from Kosovo. She's a survivor of the war in Kosovo. She's a medical doctor. She's also the executive director of the Kosova Rehabilitation Center. We have Kolbassia Haoussou, and he is a torture survivor from Central Africa. He was the co-founder of Survivors Speak Out in London. Many of you might know them. He is now the director of survivor empowerment at Freedom from Torture. And lastly, but certainly not least, we have Vasilije Karsniki-Goodman. She's a torture survivor from Kosovo. She is an MP in Kosovo, and she will be telling her story as what is the impact of the journey of empowerment. So with those words of introduction, I'm going to hand it over to Léonce, and you will begin the presentations. You'll have 7 minutes, and then we'll allow you to ask questions of Léonce, and then we'll go forward. So please, thank you.
Thank you so much, Lisa. Thank you for organizing. Thank you for IRCT. Thank you for your team that managed to pull this meeting together. Thank you for interpreters who are helping us to get this message across. Thank you for my fellow presenters and the attendees. My name is Léonce. I was born and raised in Rwanda, and I was a refugee for 3 years in Congo, and I'm now living and working in the US since 2015. I'm the executive director of Torture, Abolition, and Survivor Support Coalition, a very long name, but we call it TASSC. And TASSC was founded in 1998 by Sister Diana Ortiz, who recently died, unfortunately. A torture survivor herself. She was tortured in Guatemala, and when she came back to US as a torture survivor, she wanted to speak out about what happened to her, and she wanted people who tortured her to be sanctioned, and she wanted the world to know what happened to her, because she knew there are other people who, like her, were tortured but don't have the platform to speak out. Sister Diana did a hunger strike in front of the White House for 2 weeks. She met the president at that time. She did many activities to highlight the torture that was happening in Guatemala, but also around the world as a survivor. So that's how TASSC started, with a few other survivors. I think 5 of them were all women. They started TASSC to help survivors to speak out against torture from around the world. So since then, TASSC has adopted that the practice of making the bridge for survivors to speak out, to tell their stories, in order to change the policies related to the practice of torture and the culture of impunity happening around the world for the torturers. And since then, TASSC has, all the executive directors for TASSC have been survivors, because the Sister Diana believed that they understand what is in the mind of a survivor, and what is, that the survivors are the masters of their experience. Half of our board are survivors, so they're involved in the decisions that we make at TASSC regarding the services that we provide, but also the subject of advocacy. And I was lucky to be part of this conversation, and I was asked to talk about the pros and cons of having survivors speaking out, telling their stories, advocating. I will start by the cons. When you ask a survivor to tell their story, it's not a piece of cake. It's not like you're asking them to tell you how was their last vacation. That's not the way it is. They are going to tell their story. It's a painful story all the time. It's a painful story, and that story, you know, people have to understand how courageous it is for survivors to tell their story, and that may bring back the memories of the, you know, what happened to them, the experience of torture. You know, depending on the situation, especially in a political situation, by telling their story, a survivor can reveal their identity and obviously maybe put their families back in their countries in danger. They can also jeopardize their legal process if they are asking for asylum, if the story they're telling is not exactly how it's written in the asylum document. But those are the pros. However, the advantage of telling their story is much bigger than those downsides. And if well managed, those downsides actually can come down to, you know, very small compared to what it can do to tell their stories. The first, survivors, as I said before, they are the masters of their own experience. There's no one who can tell a story of a survivor like the survivor themselves. They went through the experience, however small or big that experience was. It is the experience, and they know it, and they know how they feel about it. So I think that's one of the pros of getting survivors to advocate for issues around torture and to tell their stories. The other thing that I've seen is that 70% of the survivors that come to TASSC, they were advocates back in their countries. They were advocates, they were whistleblowers, they were journalists, they were activists, human rights defenders. And actually the majority of them were tortured because of being activists, of speaking out against what is happening in their countries. So that's why they were tortured. So having these individuals continue to advocate, it is only natural to do so, because that's what they've been doing. That's what they were tortured for. And they want to continue to do that, because in that way, if they continue to do that, because they have been told by their torturers that they will no longer be able to talk, they will no longer be able to advocate. That's why they were tortured. They were being silenced. So as soon as they get an opportunity, as soon as your center or yourself give them an opportunity to advocate, to talk about what happened to them, and to talk about the changes that they need, they will jump on that opportunity, because they want to continue to speak out, because they were told that they would never speak against their government or against their torturers. So I think once we make that bridge and prepare them to advocate for themselves and for the change, they will jump on the opportunity. Also, another thing is that we do a lot of research on torture, what's happening in different countries. We have statistics, but a survivor story brings a lot. It brings a irreplaceable subject to the conversation. Either if you're talking to policymakers or educating the community, the survivor's story brings that irreplaceable subject to the conversation. So it is always important to get the survivors to bring that human side of the story, of the statistics, of the research. So the survivor story will bring that to the conversation. Also, I think 2 years ago, we did a small research with the survivors, asking them why they're doing advocacy. Actually, it was surprising. Most of them, they didn't even talk about themselves. They said, we're doing this so that our colleagues back home, journalists, advocate, activists, so that our colleague could continue to advocate safely. we are doing this so that our families back home could live a peaceable life without anyone harassing them or torturing them. We are doing this so that people who tortured us and people who are continuing to torture people could be brought to justice. So most of the time, they really, really worried about people who are back home, people who are still doing activism. They want them to be free to continue to speak out. So that was something that was very helpful, gave us confidence to continue to support survivors who want to speak out and tell their stories. During that research also, we managed to realize that it also helps with their mental health as they continue to do what they like to do. It has improved their mental status, how they feel about themselves. They feel like they're useful again. They can influence the policy. So from that, we thought that this is also something that we could continue to promote, so that survivors who are survivors back home who want to continue to speak out could use that actually to do something, because especially here in US, you have a system which is broken asylum system, where a survivor can do maybe 5 years before getting their asylum. They can do a year to 2 years before they get their work permit. So in the meantime, sometimes they're doing nothing. So they feel like, they're failures, they failed. But giving them the opportunity to speak out, to advocate, to actually make a change in advocacy, they feel like they're useful again, they're doing something again for their colleagues back home. So I will just stop by here. I know we're going to have a session for questions, but again, I'll continue to encourage and promote a survivor being able to tell their story the way they want to tell it, and the centers to become the bridge to get the survivors where they need to be able to influence the policy. Thank you.
Thank you, Léonce. Eloquent words. The bridge, make the bridge, master of their experience. I would like to open the floor for a brief 10 minutes of questions, so the audience is able to participate a bit here and be active. So you can either raise your hand using the reactions button. There's a hand that can be raised, or you can write in the chat and we will try and monitor. It's kind of first come, first serve. So if you're really got a question, let us hear or see from you.
I see Andre with his hand up.
Okay. Andre, a quick one, please.
Andrés. Sí, gracias. Sí, TASSC está trabajando contra la tortura en Guantánamo, porque hay un silencio tremendo sobre esa realidad y el escándalo persiste.
I'm wondering if the panelists were also aware, were also able to get these questions translated. No.
Otherwise, we can help with the question.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Andres, it wasn't a question, actually, right?
Exactly. It was a statement. It was a statement about Guantanamo and yeah, why is there silence on Guantanamo? At this point, I will also, well, I don't know if you would like to comment on that, Léonce, but if there are questions about survivor engagement, that would be great.
I'm asking if TASSC is working against the silence about Guantanamo, because it remains the greatest scandal of torture.
Thank you, Andres. TASSC is part of a coalition called Guantanamo Coalition. It's a group of more than 40 organizations here in Washington, D.C. and across the U.S. We continue the advocacy against for closing the Guantanamo and compensating the people who were tortured, without a reason. So we are part of that coalition, Guantanamo coalition, working toward the closure of Guantanamo.
Thank you, Léonce. Are there other questions for Léonce? My colleagues can help me if there are other hands that are up. So questions about building the bridge or talking about survivors as the master of the experience, the human rights perspective, where they've been activists from where they've come from, and this allows them to regain their sense of being and taking on the skills that they know so well. If there are no questions at this time, then we will go on to the next speaker, but you are free to reserve your questions. There'll be a question and answer at the end of the session. And of course, you can ask questions in the chat. Yes. So at this point, we're going to go on to the next speaker, which is Feride, and she is a survivor from the war in Kosovo. And Feride, I will give the floor to you. You're speaking about the road to torture survivor engagement is not always easy. Feride.
Thank you, Lisa. Thank you to all of you. Today, I would like to thank you also IRCT for gathering us together with survivors and service providers in one place, at least virtually due to the pandemic situation, to share our perspective and lesson learned throughout the years of direct involvement in activism and as well as providing service. I represent Kosova Rehabilitation Center for Torture Victims. It's a member established indeed from IRCT in 1999. I met IRCT in my first humanitarian work in Albania. I live in Kosovo. I'm from Kosovo, but due to the war situation, I moved to Albania to finish my study. And my first contact with IRCT, it was so decisive that I turned my career from a gastroenterologist to the human rights activist. So from that time and now, I am working and leading Kosova Rehabilitation Center, and we are quite engaged on promoting survivors' rights, but we do that through the different channels. Today, we are gathered to discuss how we can empower survivors who lead action against the crime they suffered, highlighting the fundamental need to endorsing a survivor-centric approach in the rehabilitation we work and we are committed to. Life experience, expertise, as my colleagues said, it is tremendous value and guide for our work because it is a bridge connecting survivors with us as a service provider. From my career as a service provider, as a young medical doctor, being directly involved with survivors for almost 2 decades and more, I have understood that the way towards healing and overcoming personal trauma is through finding and creating a sense of agency, because this is exactly what is being taken away from them, from the survivors of sexual violence during the traumatic event. Through taking charge of their own narratives, through telling their own story in the way they choose, survivors reclaim their dignity and validate their sense of self. So it's so important to work with them and to empower them to feel themselves, to validate their stories, the society to recognize what's happened with them. We start, the way as we are engaging with survivors of sexual violence, it is in different ways and it depends on different situations. We try really to give them a role and to guide us in the way as we engage them. So in our rehabilitation work with survivors, it became evident that survivor support group or self-supporting group, it was very helpful in boosting the effectiveness of the psychosocial support by providing them direct psychological care. Through supporting this group, we let them to participate together and break their shell, sometimes heavily moved and become, some of them, they moved from this shell and they become activists, leaders, civil rights defenders, and they are resilient and support others also to break those barriers in society. In order to do that in a safe way as possible, because there are always space to be improved, we are guided by the survivor-centric approach. What we do first when we engage survivors to be either publicly or depend in which processes they could be engaged. First of all, we have to recognize that survivors are a heterogeneous group or category of people that based on their needs, we need to adapt our approach. Each victim must be regarded as a unique person because in our experience, we define them as a different identity, which might raise different needs and different priorities. So never ever one protocol cannot be applied to another person because they have the individuality and we have to adapt our approach. A survivor-centric approach requires to listen them carefully and assess their needs and promote their rights and in the best interests. So what we do in our daily practice in order to ensure that. I think the most important is holistic approach in the service. And what we mean with holistic approach, of course, working for 25 years in this field, medical and psychosocial support is the first one. Then legal support if they needed to face the court or for any other purpose. If they are rehabilitated, we provide them psychosocial, psychological, social and economical empowerment program, which is going through income generation project. Then we support them to have access in justice if they have to face with the justice. And with some of the survivors, we just identify their potential and we mentor them to be a community leader, or we support them to be advocate of the survivors. In terms of creating safe space and protection, I think this is very important when we discuss how we will engage them, because this is the first condition, we think. What's mean that for the survivor? Survivors of conflict-related sexual violence, as all we agree and all we know, are very fragile and sensitive group due to the consequence they carry out by themselves. Besides the consequence, as individuals, also they have to deal not only with personal consequence, but also they face a lot of social stigma and prejudice, and not support as well as from community and their family. Therefore, when we carry out our approach, we work in different fronts because it's not only a survivor itself that we have to work, but we have also to consider other needs which are surrounding her. We are thinking for family needs and community needs. In our perspective, first, we try to ensure confidentiality because this is the one that is crucial to start to engage or disclose the survivor. Then we have to sign the consent with survivor and try to establish joint objective, and we develop together. Secondly, we try to assure full understanding of the objective, because sometimes as a medical doctor, as a provider, we make the objective, but we have to know that sometimes the capacities of the survivor could be limited. So we have really to make sure that they understand clear and they are fully engaged, as well as we have to manage the expectation of the survivors. Third, we have, of course, to assess the potential risk and harms. And we need to get adequate risk mitigation measure, because sometimes exposing or engaging survivors, there might be also some risk, and survivors could be harmed or could have consequences in the family or community. Fourth, which is another step we are trying to establish, we try really to develop and maintain a relation with survivor, which allow us to provide her continuous care as much as she needed during the time she's exposed or is engaged in different activities. There are different ways in our organization as survivors, or in different layers of the organization as survivors are engaged. From our experience, I would like to share three of them. There are also survivors who are engaged in policy making, but the first one, I would like to share one of the survivors who now it's a community leaders. And when we met her and we offered to her service, she was very heavily cased with a lot of psychological consequences. And we had really to work with her carefully for many years in order to alleviate psychological suffering. But in the same time, we identified potential that she had it, to be as a leader and the model for other survivors. So beside we supported, we had it later on to support her to establish her organization. We had it to support, to increase awareness on her community to accept this organization, because due to the taboo and stigma in our society towards survivors of sexual violence, it was not such easy to operate for her in that area. And right now we are still supporting her, mentoring her in her leadership capacity, as well as we are supporting her to fundraise. But what is important, she have now her organization in the most patriarchal area of Kosovo, and it's becoming a model for society. Of course, she's not yet disclosed, but most of the survivors who are coming there and benefiting from her services, they know that she is a survivor, and they use her as a role model, and they learn from her. The second example, which is well known now and has reached the parliament, is Vasfiye Krasniqi-Godman, who is with us today, and we are really honored to have with us her today. Her journey, as she will tell, I hope she will find the strength to share her story. It was quite difficult and challenging as well. We decided to make her testimony publicly on 19th anniversary of Kosova Rehabilitation Center for Torture Victims, which had a major echo through all the layers of society. But in order to engage Vasfiye to become a survivor activist, of course, there were certain steps we had to take as a measure in order to prevent any harming or negative consequences that might occur after she will share her story. Maybe just shortly, I would like to share that her family, Vasfiye lived in Texas. Now she moved in Kosovo because she is she is part of our parliament now. But her family approached us in 2011, and later on in 2017, she approached me directly, and she wanted to share an open letter she has writing to her rapist publicly. Vasfiye during the wartime was only 16 years, a young child, unprotected in her house, and she was catched from police gangs and was raped from 2 persons. Of course, the request of Vasfiye, as we said in the beginning, we always respect the request, and we tried also this request to adapt in the needs and the mission of the organization, as well as capacity of the organization, because as we all of us agree, survivors could have different requests, and sometimes organizations are not in the position to fulfill all of those requests. So we have to be very clear how we manage the expectation of the survivors, and also to not go beyond the capacity of the organization. So when Vasfiye asked to speak publicly, brought it as new dimension, how to organize and in which momentum to use. I would like to emphasize the crucial importance of finding a momentum when we are going in public with a story, because I think there are some preconditions to maximize our impact. We cannot bring in different moments. If the society is overwhelmed from political crisis, or there are any threatened factors outside, I think if we bring in the public the story of the victim, do not have any kind of echo or any kind of impact that we want to reach. So in this case, we didn't need to, we needed, in her case, we didn't need to ensure physical protection because she lived in US, as I said, but we had to discuss carefully with her the impact of her testimony and prepare her psychologically to share it, since she already was integrated in a SEMA network. It is another network led from Dr. Denis Mukwege and Nadia Murad. And she reached to share her story in the UN session in Geneva for 19th of June in 2018. But Geneva is something else, because you are in foreign audience. You are not in the place when rape happened to you. So being back in Kosovo, it might trigger some psychological consequences. Therefore, we had it carefully to assess her situation when she came here. So we decided 19th anniversary of our organization to dedicate to the story of Vaspije. But before that, as organization, we launched big national campaign, Be My Voice, which was already launched in that year and had it a broader audience and broader coverage in societies, and there were a good reaction from civil servant as well as from community and political leaders. So we tried to create a momentum that when Vaspije will come, really her story to have a great impact in societies. So finally, we decided on 13th of October 2019 to be as an event dedicated to her stories, which gathered more than 200 participants, including survivors, MPs, ministers, civil society, artists, community, and others. How we dealt with possible challenges coming from an exposure and sharing the story. First, we had to make sure that she represents the survivor community. And she was a case, and for that we were sure because she was the case who went through the court. Therefore, nobody could doubt or have any kind of question to claim on her past. I am bringing this element because during our advocacy effort in Kosovo Parliament, there were a lot of discussion whether survivor sexual violence exists, how we can verify them, if this number could be increased or manipulated. So we needed first to make sure that the case is a true case, which was, we were lucky to have such a brave woman as Vaspije is. Secondly, we wanted to establish objective in why we want to make the case publicly. Of course, it was the year that we launched our campaign, and we wanted to relate Vaspije's story with our campaign in order to address stigma and prejudice which are related with this crime, as well as we wanted to shake the myths and taboos regarding of survivors' sexual violence. So to prepare Vaspije to be in the public, we had to have two plans, Plan A and Plan B. The Plan A, it was that Vaspije will share her testimony personally. Plan B, it was if Vaspije is not feeling well, then a psychologist who already support Vaspije to gain reparation and to be recognized from a state to share the story with the journalist. Before we prepared the whole story, of course, we had to choose a journalist who is well known in our society and media, as well as who is sensitive towards these topics, and also prepare her how I mean, she had experience on interviewing survivors, but not in the presence of camera, of course, and with a disclosed identity. So we had it really carefully to give her a clear guidelines how to approach and what kind of question, how to handle if emotional might come. Then we had to find a place which is a secure place, let's say, and it was a space, big space, amphitheater, a kind of amphitheater place, sitting near to Ministry of Social Welfare, when this ministry is supporting survivors, as well as near to the State Prosecutor Office. The place when Vaspije had to see the journalist, it was chosen to feel a comfortable place, and even we was taking the light and to be more soft, and the audience who was sitting there was in the dark. So Vaspije was feeling herself that she's alone in that audience, even though there were 200 people who was following her stories. We was also taking that Vaspije to have a direct contact, eye contact with her husband and her family and psychologist. As well as we had it at a medical emergency unit, if something might happen, they could support us. Whole of this story or testimony was directly broadcasted in our public TV, and we had it meeting with all the editor-in-chief to broadcast it, as well as to not jump to Vaspije after she will finish the story, because this was another way how we had wanted to create safe space and to ensure that she is not overwhelmed later on from a journalist. So the story was a breaking point, I can say, for stigma and evoked the society from lethargy towards the silence of war crime. It was really a breaking point, I could say, and for which mobilized whole society from local community to the highest institution. For me and my organization, and especially for Vasfia, it was very difficult to decide in which meeting to be enrolled, because from a president, prime minister, MPs, state prosecutor, media wanted all of them to have access to her because she was the first physical appearance of survivors. She was a person personizing 20,000 survivors, which according to international studies, because Kosovo still do not have any kind of archives or inventory of this crime. And everybody wanted to meet with her. And our president in that time awarded her with a living heroine prize, which was followed from another, the current president as well. As well as she received different worldwide prizes. She became very famous. She was ambassador of the survivors worldwide. And in order to also honor her and to maintain her energy and courage, we decided in yearly basis in our annual year as organization to honor other activists with Vasfia Courage Award, which I think is so important for her as well as for us. So third example, which I would like to share with you, who take this award is Feride Rushiti, another survivor who for the first time publicly filed her case in the state prosecutor. So with her, we had a different objective. We didn't want to address the stigma. Of course, also, stigma is always part of the process and we had to address it, but the main objective, it was to empower other survivors to seek justice. Why? Because from war and now, we don't have a single case who win the justice. As you may know, Kosovo was run from UN administration till 2008 and war crimes were administrated from UN administration. None of the case succeeded, and I am sure that Vasfia will bring her experience here. Then it was EU mission. Also, none of those cases received any justice in EU mission. And just 2 years ago, Kosovo institutions were eligible to prosecute war crimes. So for that reason, we wanted Feride to invite publicly to file her case to the state prosecutor, just to use as a symbolic for other survivors to support, to have a trust and to increase the trust on those institutions, because majority of those survivors, unfortunately, they share their stories. They testified in either UN administration, either EULEX, but they never ever received any feedback or justice in the end. So most of them are frustrated. They are disappointed from this process, and it is not so easy then to empower them to seek justice. Why they seek justice? They want justice every day they mention. So for that reason, Feride was another dimension as we scale up and we brought it in different perspective. Also, bringing Feride, it was very important to prepare her psychologically, as well as to prepare the state prosecutor office, how to receive her, how to communicate with her, and it was done in the presence of media, but she didn't share the story, because if she will share the story, and she decided by herself, which was very, really crucial part to learn, to teach us how to empower all the survivors, because if she will share the story, then all the survivors would think that in order to receive justice or to start, let's say, cooperation with the state prosecutor office, you have to make your story public. So for that reason, she was just having a short press release to the media, and then went to the state prosecutor office and start to establish contact, and she's continuing with them in order to receive the justice. Now, Feride is active in different perspectives in organizations. She is part of the research group that we established from survivors and family members. And she is directly engaged in different areas where survivors are still having barriers to go forward. So those are the three good examples, let's say, but there are a lot of challenges as well, as our colleague shared already. So it's not easy to work with survivors. First, you need to know, to assess very good the maturity of the survivor, psychological consequences, if they are able to be disclosed or to be engaged in different processes in the either advocacy, either in policy level, either on media, or whenever there is a need or there is a request from a survivors. We had a case who wanted to speak in a public, but and when Wasfia indeed was in a public, she's married with an American guy, but have very strong Kosovo family who support her. And we wanted also to send this message to family of the survivor that the family exam of Wasfia, how they are supporting them, because some of the family are not supporting the victim, even some of them have some consequences in their family. So we had a case who approached to us, and it was interesting to bring the case because we wanted another perspective to tag the message in society. We didn't want it survivor, but we wanted a husband of survivor to speak how he dealt with her wife, who was detained for 3 months, systematically raped during those 3 months, being pregnant, with a lot of challenges ahead. And he was from most patriarchal part of society. So through him, we wanted really to address the stigma, to shake the taboos and patriarchal norms in societies. But unfortunately, the case was with terminal disease, and we had it to break the initiative. Of course, there were a lot of debates in the organization, also in the level of survivors, whether we have to bring this case or not, but due to the situation, we just left out, even though there was wish of the survivor and her husband to be public. Then it was another survivor who said, look, I want to share the story, but I want an apartment from you guys. And it is so important to manage the expectation, because sometimes they might think that there are certain incentives that they want, if they go in the public, they will benefit this or they will benefit that. So we make it clear to him that there is no possibility to ensure you any apartments. We are not working in that direction. We could see if there is an issue of sheltering in the family. We could see if we can refer to another mechanism, but never ever to be engaged on those kind of activities. And then, okay, after perhaps he just wanted, he asked, and then after a certain time, he also contacted Wasfia. He approached again. I said, no, I want really to break the taboos because he was a male survivor. And I want also to break taboos and also gender stereotype, because people are thinking that only women are raped. So I would like to share. Then we had to assess family situation, because in the end of the day, as a service provider, we provide them service on a daily basis. But 24 hours, they have to stay in their families, especially in our societies that are big and patriarchal families. So you have carefully to assess whether the family is informed and they agree as well. So after we get some information, unfortunately, 2 of his sons, they disagree. They said, we don't accept him at home anymore. And we had to inform the survivor that there are certain constraints. So even though we would like it really to use him as a champion from a male survivor perspective, so we didn't reach to bring him publicly.
Okay, Feride, I think this is an amazing recount. Unfortunately, I think we need to allow some space for 2 other colleagues. So if I could, sorry, interrupt you here. I'm really sorry about that. But if there's one brief question that anyone is really sitting in with, they would like to pose to Feride. I'm trying to monitor the chat here. If anyone has, or you want a hand up. Because I have a feeling, Feride, you could be telling these amazing, evidence all afternoon long. I'm going to do this then. I don't see a question in the chat. So Feride, thank you very much. At this point, I would like to give the floor to Kolbassia. And please, the Director of Survivor Empowerment at Freedom from Torture, speaking to the issue of torture survivors' resilience as human beings full of valuable contributions. So thank you very much, Feride, and over to you, Kolbassia.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. Maybe some of you give good evening or good morning. and I'm really honored, and also I want to say thank you to IRCT and Lisa, Berta, Mohammed, and also the other colleague to put this event together. And also thank you for those of IRCT members who recommended this webinar. And I think my excellent colleague panelists kind of touched quite a lot on the survivor engagement, survivor empowerment, and I'm gonna add a little bit more into that. And at Freedom from Torture, what we call the survivor empowerment is divided into two areas. One we call it service user engagement, the other one we call it survivor activism. But it's all about the survivor voices. And I want to start by asking us like a rhetorical question, yeah, for all of us here today. And the question is, between your services and also people that turn up into your services, seeking those to use those services, who is setting up the goal? Who has set up the goal? All right. If we just take like a few seconds just to reflect on this question here. So when I was accepted at Freedom from Torture, as a client, I had set my goal of what I want to achieve. But did Freedom from Torture know that goal at that moment? I don't think so, because I think I wasn't asking the question, right? Some of you support people who may flee torture and seeking protection in another country that you operate and you support them. But one thing that you should understand, the day when somebody decided, to flee, to escape torture, they already set themselves a goal, because I think that's the first thing that you do. You set yourself a goal and you do everything possible to achieve those goals. And those goals can differ, like, Feride said, torture survivors, they are not like one single individual. People are different, all right? And people set different goals. And, some of those goals, if we take again in terms of the migration, those goals that people may set as, like, for example, protections. Some of them can include justice, some of them reparation, therapy, rehabilitation, and just to mention a few. But that's the goal that the individual set for themselves. And everything that's happened along the road to achieve those goals are the means that help people achieve those goals. And when people come to you as a seeking services, the aim is that services the seeking will help them achieve that goal. If that's the goal, it's rehabilitation. So then that's what that's what they're looking for. If that's part of the justice, so that's what they're looking for, and so and so. So at Freedom from Torture, we have 4 pillars, and the pillar are protection, accountability, rehabilitation, and survivor empowerment. And survivor empowerment is central to everything as we do. Right. So then, the second, part of the question that I will be asking you now is this. I'm just a small scenario, because the time is limited. I had a video that I want to show you, because the time is limited, so I decided not to show the video. But I'm just gonna give you that kind of scenario. It's a scenario this way: between a cook who cooked a cake but did not eat the cake, and a person who eat the cake, who's the best person to answer the question how the cake tastes like? Just reflect for a few seconds. All right. So, you know, the answer could be simple, right? Basically, the person who eat the cake will be the best person to answer the question how the cake tastes like. All right. Is it just a principle that we use in our organization, in our services? Because it's really important to ask the right question to the right person. I'm Lisa, just keep reminding me on time, yeah?
I will. You
All
got
right.
5 minutes more, my friend.
All right. So it's really important to ask the right question to the right people at the right time. One thing that also you have to understand as a service provider in relationship with torture survivors are coming in and receiving services to you, you hold an absolute power in regard to the service that, you know, people come in seeking from you. And it is really important that to understand what is the level that you stand in regard to the people that come in and seeking your services. Because whatever else you do will mirror, you know, that power, the power balance or power and balance that, you know, you have. Right? At Freedom from Torture, we always ask ourselves the question, who is the right person to answer the question that we're looking for answer? Whether that's if we are doing a consultation on the services, so then who is the right beneficiary for that services? Who is using the services? Is it the services about the impact of the people? Is it meeting the need of those people? Or is it a question in terms of theoretical questions? So if the question is about to understand, is it the service of providing, meeting the need of those people that are using or not? So then it's adamant for us that we need to ask to those people that are using the services. We don't need to ask anybody else. We don't need to bring a consultant to try to look at the services and then write as a report telling us how the service is working or not working. We ask survivors, we ask the service user to understand from their perspective, is it what we're doing, is it meeting the need? Is it meeting the goal that they set for themselves for that services? And if it's not meeting that, right? So therefore, we need to look at what we need to do to be able to make it happen. And also, I need to touch another point that also I think Feride also mentioned that in her address, is creating the safe space. Because, you know, like, you know, the power balance is created in a way which people feel that they are so grateful for the services that, you know, you providing, that sometimes giving you feedback, they feel that, you know, they're being no respectful to you. They're being ungrateful. So, you know, they try to keep, you know, the feedback to themselves. Or the other way is that people may be fearful because they rely on the service that you provided. So then, you know, they don't need to say anything, because the fear is that maybe they say something and you won't like what comment they make and you stop that services provided to them. So, you know, they keep it. So it is really paramount for you to set up a space where people feel safe and people understand that the engagement within that engagement that you're doing is only to improve the services so that, you know, the services meet the need of the survivors, right? So that's another really important. And, you know, to get into that journey of Freedom from Torture, we got into a journey in 2007. So, you know, for a few years, we realized that the way that we're doing things wasn't working, is not going to the way that we want to achieve. So we took a step again, we go to the boring door, and then we come up with another plan. And this time we recruited somebody with the lived experience of our services. Thank you, Lisa. With our services to lead, you know, the survivor empowerment to the service user engagement. And I was lucky to be appointed, and I start doing the work that need to be done. So you have to understand that when you're engaging into that and bringing the survivor's voice, like, you know, Léonce was saying, it's important for them to tell their story and to contribute to that. You need to understand you may make mistakes. You need to understand that you need to share power. You need to understand that you need to create a space for people to engage. And you need to understand that when it comes down to your services, the people that are using your services, they're the real expert, nobody else. And if you put that all together and with the leadership that you have and the resources that you put around it, I think, you know, you will be moving along on creating the space for the people that you're supporting will be key element or key actor into delivering the service that you need to deliver so that, you know, they can achieve their goal. Thank you very much.
Amazing, Kolbassia. Super, thank you very much. I'm going to do a little meeting management. There's no questions at this time because we're going to go right on. Thank you very much, Kolbassia. We're going on to Vasya. So you have time, please. If you could speak for 5 to 7 minutes here at the end, and then we could open the floor for last questions. So thank you very much for this interesting and excellent intervention. And we'll go on to our last speaker. And I hope she is able to join now.
Thank you. Thank you for
Excellent.
the invite.
Thank you, Vasya.
My name is Vasya Krasnichi-Goodman. I'm from Kosovo. I had a normal childhood back in the 80s, 90s in the former Yugoslavia. I was 15 when the war broke out in 1998. In 1999, after I turned 16, I was abducted by a Serbian police officer, and I was raped and tortured by 2 Serbian men. After the war ended, when United Nations came to Kosovo, I believed so much in their justice and their right doing, I decided to report my case to them. Unfortunately, United Nations didn't do anything for my case. When it came to my case, they didn't. I'm not even sure if they even looked at it. When EULEX came over in 2010, I started the process from the very beginning, giving testimonies to different officers, to EULEX, to Kosovo police officers for the war crime units. We had the whole dealing with justice from 2010 to 2011, all the way to 2014, when my case went all the way to Supreme Court of Kosovo, and I was denied justice. And to me, it felt like worse than being tortured and everything else, because when justice is denied, that's something that hurts you even more after the crime is done. With my case, I was open, or I can say I was free to discuss with my family and with my close friends, but I never shared my story with the public. Until 2017, I decided to write a letter, an open letter to the rapist. And I shared it on Facebook, and I got a lot of support from back home, from people in the United States, because that's where I live now. I decided that maybe that's what survivors need. They should be able to share their stories and receive support. So I contacted Dr. Feride Rushiti through her organizations, and we decided that it was time for me to speak up and share my story with the public in Kosovo. Kosovo had heard many, many stories before mine, but they always hid their identity. It was always covering the face, changing their voice, so no one could put a story with a face because they were always covered. But I decided to go with my full name without hiding my identity. It was very difficult, and still is, even 3 years later. Sometimes when I think to myself, I wonder, how was I so brave to do that? But I think it was the right step to do. For me, when I shared my story, was October 16th. Feride's organization had thought of everything, the way where I had to sit, where my family was and everything else, because it's very important for the family to be present. Because for me, when I had eye contact with my siblings, with my husband, they give me more strength, they give me more power to tell the truth in front of live audience. And ever since then, I became an activist. I got to testify at the US Congress for the Kosovo war crimes done by Serbians. I got to share my story a couple of times with the United Nations in New York and Geneva. and a few other places. I think after I spoke in Kosovo, it gave the survivors some hope that society and the families would understand them better. And I always say, even if the survivors are not ready to share their stories, they don't want to be in public, at least I hope they have the freedom to be able to talk to the family members in the open instead of keeping it just inside themselves, because there's a lot of survivors that nobody knows that they are survivors. I have survivors contact me and they say, Vasfia, you're the only one that knows. I don't even have the strength to go to an organization because they are scared of they're going to be known. And so that's what we've been working on, trying to get free space, even if it's at home, to be able to talk. So far, we don't have another survivor that is ready to speak up, but I'm hoping they will on their own time when they're ready. Just like for me, nobody pressured me, nobody pushed me. It was my own will that I wanted to share the story. The only difference is I went through with Dr. Feride Rushiti, and we managed, because it was a very hard process, the day that it was very difficult for me. But I'm thankful I did it, and now here I am as a politician. But I decided to join a political party and run for the parliament member, and I won. I believe I was in the top 5 from my top 5 most voted, and so I'm hoping to make some changes when it comes to justice. I have one perpetrator behind the bars for the rape crimes, and we have over 20,000 survivors. And to me, that's beyond, it's unbelievable. It's not something that we can continue to live with. We have to fight justice, and I'm hoping to be able to do that within Parliament, starting there, and work with the organizations and be able to focus on stigma, focus on justice as my main goal. Thank you, and I'm looking forward to the discussion.
Yeah, that was just an amazing story. Your lived experience, I think it really moves us all. And I think your bravery is astounding. So I'm really happy that we could give you the platform to speak here today, as the same goes for Feride, who's the organization that was there to support you. And the same goes for Kolbassia on your journey, and Léonce, the journey of all 4 of you individuals, which represents, I think, the journey of thousands, probably hundreds of thousands of torture survivors around the world, or what could be their journey, is the important thing, I think, to focus on today. So we have 15 more minutes, and I will open the floor to questions. We have seen questions. I'm going to ask my great colleagues at IRCT to be supporting here, but there has been a question about this issue of how difficult it can be and some of the challenges that you would face. I'm spooling down here. I'm interested to know, and this is a question that comes from, I'll have to get the name. I'm interested to know whether it's ever a danger that engaging in activism can keep survivors trapped in survivor identity rather than allowing them to move into a new life. I understand absolutely that's a personal choice. I also utterly believe in the importance of processing these experiences. This is why I work with therapeutic creative writing here, but in some instances I've experienced it can seem not entirely psychologically healthy, as though people cling to this identity and are unable to proceed to their new lives. Anybody on the panel wanting to jump into that one?
Léonce?
Thank you. That's a really great question, and we get that question a lot. And but as the individual has mentioned, we always try to make sure that, as many of us have said, survivors themselves, they have to make that decision to advocate, to speak out. As the last presenter said, she decided that she wanted to speak out. So what centers do, what we do is to provide that platform, to put the platform there, to put a system around that platform to allow the survivors who are ready to speak out to be able to do so. Of course, some survivors actually prefer to keep that identity of a survivor. We've seen many survivors who say, I'm always a survivor. I want everybody to know, and I want to, you know, the people who tortured me to know that, you know, they tortured me, but I, you know, as a survivor, I'm going to move forward and continue my life, but as a survivor. The other people choose to not identify as survivors, as they choose to do that at some point. You know, there's no general rule. Some people choose not to continue to be called survivors. We've seen many survivors who said, you know, as a survivor, I want to become a social entrepreneur, a human rights entrepreneur. We've seen many survivors who turned their story into actually helping other people to know what is happening. We've seen many people creating organizations to end torture because they know what happened to them. They want to use their story to actually help other people to tell their story and to end torture. We've seen people become create speakers bureau to actually get, you know, that platform even bigger to reach a bigger audience. We've seen people become country experts, like security experts, you know, peace experts, because of the experience of a torture survivor. I think it gives them that credit and gives them that, you know, we've seen many people coming to, you know, I'm from Rwanda. I've seen many people come to Rwanda to see gorillas, and they come back to the US, they call themselves Rwanda experts. But I would rather see someone, a survivor from Rwanda, call themselves a peace, you know, a peace and conflict resolution expert on Rwanda, because they know the situation, they've been through it, their family members have been through it. So I know there are many survivors who would love to play that role as survivors, either as, you know, they can continue to call themselves survivors and keep that identity, or sometimes they choose not to be called that, but continue to speak out against what happened to them and what is happening to other people. That was my contribution.
Thank you very much, Léonce. I'm going to move to Lynn Walker now, who has a question, and then we will be going to Polly Rossdale, so you're prepared. So Lynn, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thanks very much. So Lynn Walker from Tree of Life Trust Zimbabwe. And it's not so much a question, but very much an acknowledgement for the 3 survivors who've spoken today. And we really admire your courage and your inspiration. I just wanted to add to the conversation, because Tree of Life Trust is a survivor implemented program, but because we're sort of in an ongoing violations where you've got complete impunity, our kind of role that survivors play is not around activism, it's not around advocacy, because that is not safe, but it's around the therapeutic process and the role that survivors can play in helping and supporting other survivors. And I really acknowledge what Kolbassia said about, you know, that how that gives you a sense of agency, but that survivors have become a kind of living embodiment of restoration and healing to other survivors in the community. And so it's not just around activism, and it's not just around telling stories, that survivors can have a really important role. And in fact, many of the survivors we work on, about 60% of my team are survivors, and we've got about 150 community facilitated survivors. And they say that they actually got really disempowered by having to tell their story all the time, and they really felt it was a kind of tokenism, that they were just telling their story, and to have a more active role, a more therapeutic role, has been very empowering for them. So I just wanted to add that to the conversation. I'm really just to say to other people, it is possible to be survivor-led as an organisation, survivor implemented, and it has real positives, as Léonce said.
Thank you very much for Lynn for bringing this to the floor. And it's an extremely important point that the therapeutic journey to rehabilitation can also be incredibly informed by participation of survivors, and in many places it can be survivor-led. So thanks very much for bringing that into play. There are a couple questions in the bar here that are exactly asking about that, like how has the survivor empowerment or engagement journey actually implemented or been implemented in the way the organizations are structured or organized. I should probably be reading this out so we get it exactly in the formulation of the person. So curious about how survivor engagement has changed their organization structures, operations, and decision-making processes, is the question that comes from Pete Dross at CVT in the US, and also from Polly. And Polly, I need the name of your organization. I'm not sure. Polly Rossdale?
Yeah, hi, I'm from Lifeboat Ladder. I was
Thank
curious
you.
about how the goals were articulated by survivors had changed the service provider. So yeah, very similar to Peter's question, which implies a question about power imbalance too, I think.
Great. Is anyone on the panel willing to step into that question?
I will, yeah, I will, I will start, and then anyone else also can, can jump in. I think it's really important that to have a strong leadership in terms of, and also, take a little bit of risk, basically. I think at Freedom from Torture, I think, what we done, we took a little bit of risk, because I think we're jumping into the unknown, area, because I think there is not in torture rehabilitation sector, there is not, it's not something that is quite done often into that regard, of bringing, survivors as a central point, and, taking leadership and, lead, from survivors from traditional, organization or rehabilitation, center, per se. And by having having a strong theory of change that focus on making survivors central, and survivor empowerment and survivor leadership, help us, put the structure into place at Freedom from Torture, and then start building those structure, step by step. Started from one person, leading to the work, to a position currently where, we'll be recruiting about, about 10 survivors that will be part of the newly created director or survivor empowerment. So you see, there is kind of, I think, that we need to take into consideration that the resources can differ from organization to organization. Some organizations have absolutely nothing, or they have a little bit more, and so those kind of things need to be taken into consideration. But looking into creating a structure that will allow that growth of survivors to be in a leadership position is absolutely paramount. And one more thing that is really important is, Léonce emphasized that twice, is that let's not look at the survivors just as vulnerable people. Right? Survivors have so much expertise. Like Leon said, people used to be expert in different areas, and it does not mean that you're tortured. It means that those skills, is gone. It may be covered, by the trauma, but while the space is created, those cannot come up. And that's the thing that you need to cultivate within your organization, to allow the roadmap that will allow people, to raise up. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kolbassia. This is resilience, right? Buried beneath the tumbling and the crumbling remains of the earthquake are these like spears of hope. And I think this is exactly what we can harness if allowed. So is anyone else on the panel wanting to respond to these questions? Otherwise, we could take one or two more. We have 5 minutes left.
I think Feride. Yeah,
oh, Feride, sorry, I didn't see. That's my bad. Feride, please.
In terms of involving or engaging survivors, I just want to bring a case of one of our survivors who was in very difficult psychological state. We worked with 6 years with her, and after we identified potential, we supported her to establish the organization. And she already have an organization which is serving as a model for the survivor with a lot of activities. And she decided, I mean, the way this power balance was interfered in whole structure of the initiative. I mean, we offered her a position, or we asked what is her wish. Of course, she wanted to have her organization in her region. And when we established the organization, it was in the beginning just supporting her with the leadership capacity, as well as organization for around 5 years, sent its psychologists and psychosocial team to support directly the beneficiaries, because she needed, of course, some time till she established her organization well. And now she have more than 300 survivors who are coming in this area. When she was established, the community called her organization of shame, because they didn't want it to introduce with a survivor of sexual violence as a leaders, and they felt due to the taboo and stigma towards this vulnerable group, there were a lot of discussion in community. So we had it to prepare the ground in society, we had it to support her as a leader, as well as we had it to ensure that psychosocial support is maintaining through our direct service. And right now, she become a model of municipality. Whenever they have some delegation, they get her as a good example. And even we reached to ensure the old property of municipality we were used for municipality to be donated to her organization. And she's very powerful lady, I think. Publicly, she do not share her story. She is not telling about her experiences, but majority of community knows, and they support, they accept her. And now she is there are 4 organizations who are licensed from a state to provide direct service, and her organization is to be licensed from Ministry of Labor and Social Welfare to provide. So she is able to deliver service through the staff who is working there, work some kind of very specific handmade jewelries, which are sold not only inside, but today I was just, while I was in webinar, she wrote to me that she was unable to follow the webinar because she make a contract with one company to sell those products out of the country. So
Fair enough.
And another way, as we are trying to integrate in our structure the survivor, recently we established a resource group from survivors and family members. And this resource group will lead us mainly how to approach to the community, how to tackle stigma, how to organize community talk. And some of survivors who are publicly now and they reach to speak in public, they will be as leaders on those kind of community approach intervention in order to empower survivors and their family in the area when survivors didn't went forward it, and they have still a lot of barriers. So in different, as well as we use them for policy level and in the reparation perspective and the recognition of the laws was completely led from the survivors. They were in those close meetings when they brought in certain requests and needs in order to be recognized from a state.
Okay.
But Lisa, can I add something?
You can, if you can take like 30 seconds, because we need to end on time.
Yeah, I wanted, it was actually asked how the structure, the survivor can help us structure organization. I think from the, how TASSC was created. TASSC was created by a survivor. Half of our board members are survivors. Our executive director has to be a survivor. And once we do advocacy, once a year, we have 1 or 2 campaigns. We bring together all survivors, say, what type of campaign you want us to bring to end torture? If we do a statement, let's say Ethiopia, what is happening, we have to bring all Ethiopian survivors, ask them, what do you want us to say about Ethiopia? So I think these are many ways that we're getting survivors involved.
Excellent. And on that phenomenal last note of hope, I hope very much, we're going to close the meeting now. We would like to say thank you very much to our fantastic panelists. I think you each gave us a very rich and very detailed perspective and an amazing amount of ideas of how you can take this forward in your own organizations. There were 91 participants at the max on the call today. We're representing, I don't know how many countries, more than 30 countries around the globe here. And we are sure to take a lot of this forward in our new strategy process, or in our strategy process in IRCT, and also know that you approve the global rehabilitation standards. they clearly speak to the need to involve survivors, and survivors have to be part of everything we do and actually lead in the work we're doing. So there will be places where we can hold ourselves to account. In closing, I would say if you would give us 1 more minute of your time, we're going to put on the screen an evaluation. It's very important for us to know how we're doing with these meetings. Did you learn anything? Did you get to ask the questions, etc.? So if you could please take a minute to answer, and Mohammed's got it on the screen now. It's quite valuable for us. And then I would say in closing, thank you very much to all who participated. So Mohammed, I don't know if we're done with the polling. It can be shown on the screen, but otherwise, here's me telling you I don't exactly know how this works. It was really amazing to have you all. And if anyone would love to join us for another webinar of this nature, it will be on April 22nd. We will be talking about the socioeconomic perspective for torture survivors. And we'll be bringing some great examples from colleagues just like these from around the world who will talk about livelihoods and sustainable livelihoods for torture survivors as an inherent part of the rehabilitation process. Thank you very much. And tell me, any of our team, do we then just close the meeting?
If everybody's finished with the questions, I guess we can.
Yeah, great. Now you can see the results.
Maybe,
fantastic results on the screen.
I would say people can start leaving once they've completed the post survey, and we will just wait until the last one.
We're good. We're good. We have 100% answered now from the people that are still online. So we could just thank you everyone for joining us.
Thanks a lot. See you guys next. See all these men and women, torture survivors, human beings. See you next time. Thanks a lot for participating.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Ciao, everyone.